God bless the family meeting. God bless Bob Vanderplatz. What a tremendous voice for life, for marriage, for returning to our founding principles. And God bless each and every one of you for being here today and for your passion. Now, you all had the opportunity earlier this afternoon to get to know my father. And as you saw, my dad is very soft-spoken. Understated, really. And I will confess I am today violating what had been a cardinal rule, which is never, ever, ever follow my father at the podium. But I do have to share with y'all a bit of bad news. By virtue of each of you being here today, on Monday morning you're going to be audited by the IRS. So I thank you for the courage of your convictions. You know, back when I was running for U.S. Senate, it was one Saturday morning, about 6:30 in the morning, I was doing a radio interview on the phone. And our daughter Caroline, who's now 5, Caroline came running into the bedroom, wanted to play with Dad. My wife Heidi jumped out of bed, she pulled Caroline out in the living room. She said, "No, sweetheart, Daddy is doing a radio interview." Caroline crossed her arms, she stomped out, she said, "Politics, politics, politics. It's always politics." And you know, if you look at politics, you go back to the original Greek. Politics had two parts. Poly, meaning many, and ticks, meaning blood-sucking parasites. And that fairly accurately describes the state of affairs in Washington today. You know, what I want to talk to you all about this afternoon is a transformation that is happening, a transformation that is happening on the political front nationally. And that is the rise of the grassroots. There is a divide of Washington versus the people. And we have been seeing over and over again the people rising up and saying, look, career politicians in both parties have let us down. We need to get back to the Constitution and the principles that made this country strong. And I want to talk to you about this phenomenon, the rise of the grassroots, in 3 different time periods: the past, the present, and the future. The past, I want to tell you a little bit about our campaign for U.S. Senate in Texas. Now, when I started at the beginning of 2011, I was at 2% in the polls. The margin of error was 3%. I was pretty excited about that until Heidi pointed out to me that technically I could have been at negative 1%. We went through a $50 million primary, most expensive primary in the country. We're outspent 3-1. Had $35 million in nasty attack ads run against us. Midway through, Heidi's watching the TV, watching all those ads. She turns to me and says, "Goodness gracious, I didn't realize what a rotten guy you were." And we saw something incredible happen in Texas. Despite being outspent 3-1, we saw thousands upon thousands of people all across Texas, and conservatives all over the country come together, begin knocking on doors, begin making phone calls, begin sending emails, begin getting on Facebook, getting on Twitter. And despite a mountain of money on the other side, we went from 2% in the polls to not just winning, but winning the primary by 14 points and winning the general by 16 points. That's a testament to the power of the grassroots. That's a testament to what each and every one of you are here doing today. All of the powers that be said it could not be done. It was impossible. And the people rose up and said, you know what? We're tired of politicians and the media telling us what can't be done. We got to turn things around. Now let's talk about the present. We're having fight after fight to defend our liberty, to defend the Constitution. Right now, and over again, we're seeing grassroots as a major victory. You know, one of the first things I had the privilege of doing in the U.S. Senate is standing side by side my friend Senator Rand Paul in his 13-hour filibuster against drones. If Washington politics controlled the outcome of that, that was an impossible fight. Most of our colleagues in the Senate thought what he was doing was curious, was quixotic, and yet what happened is the American people engaged during those 13 hours. They became fixated by C-SPAN. A phrase that does not occur naturally in the English language. With all apologies to our friends from C-SPAN. And the American people spoke up, began tweeting, getting on Facebook, and as a result of the American people's involvement, President Obama was forced to do what he had refused to do for 3 straight weeks, which is admit in writing the Constitution limits his authority to target U.S. citizens. Another example was guns. Following the tragic shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, President Obama came out and said, not that we're going to go after violent criminals. I think we should come down on violent criminals like a ton of bricks. But instead, President Obama used it as an excuse to try to go after the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. And Vice President Joe Biden, the nice thing is you don't even need punchline. You just say his name and people laugh. But Vice President Joe Biden had some helpful advice. He said if your house is ever attacked, just go outside the front door with a double-barreled shotgun and fire both barrels in the air. Which is very, very good advice. If it so happens you're being attacked by a flock of geese. You know, if that dispute were decided on Washington rules, the momentum behind the president's anti-Second Amendment proposals was unstoppable. And what happened again is the American people got engaged. The American people got involved. You know, I was proud to team up with Chuck Grassley, the elder statesman from Iowa. We introduced a bill that was called the Cruz legislation. It was the law enforcement alternative that said, listen, let's go after violent criminals, but let's protect the Second Amendment. And what happened again was the American people rose up in overwhelming numbers and let their voices be heard to our elected officials. And when the vote came on the floor of the Senate, every single proposal of the president's that would have undermined the Second Amendment was voted down. We're seeing another example right now in immigration, where, according to the rules of Washington, an awful lot of folks in Washington want to repeat the mistakes of the past, to grant amnesty, grant legalization first, and sometime maybe in the future secure the borders. Now, I think that would be a grave and foolish mistake, and the American people want to secure the borders first. We want to welcome and celebrate legal immigrants. And we want to uphold the rule of law. And you know what? There is no more forceful advocate for securing the borders than Iowa's own Steve King. That fight fight's going to come down to the House of Representatives, and I believe because the grassroots are speaking that the House of Representatives is not going to follow Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats down the path of legalization first and not securing the borders. And, we saw another example in my home state of Texas, in the battle recently over life, following the horrific atrocities in Gosnell. The Texas legislature acted sensibly to prevent those kind of atrocities and to prohibit late-term abortions, to prohibit abortions after 20 weeks. And we saw two different types of grassroots. We saw the grassroots on the left, organized by President Obama's political action teams and by the liberal political action teams, by the AstroTurf efforts to send people in, and then we saw pro-life activists coming together. I thought the defining moment of that dispute in the Texas legislature is when pro-life activists were arm in arm, singing Amazing Grace. And the pro-abortion activists began countering it by chanting, Hail Satan. You can't make this stuff up. I will give them credit for one thing, truth in advertising. But, we saw pro-life grassroots activists stand up in Texas, and as a result, the Texas legislature had the courage to act and to pass legislation signed into law prohibiting late-term abortions. So how about the future? Where do we go from here? The future, I think we need to do two things to turn this country around. Number one, restore economic growth, and number two, champion opportunity. If you look at growth right now, the last 4 years our economy has grown on average 0.9% a year. It's only one other period since World War II of 4 consecutive years of less than 1% growth. That was 1979 to 1982, coming out of the Jimmy Carter administration. Same failed economic policies, out of control spending, taxes, regulation, produced the exact same stagnation. Look, growth is fundamental to every other challenge we have. If you want to turn around unemployment, the national debt, if you want to maintain the strongest military in the world, you've got to have growth. I think that should be every elected official's top priority, and that ought to be a bipartisan priority. Republicans and Democrats should work together on growth. Now, how do you do it? 3 ways. Number one, reining in the out-of-control spending and unsustainable debt. Last fall, I had the opportunity to speak at the Republican National Convention. I talked about the national debt. I talked about our 2 little girls, Caroline and Catherine. Afterwards, Heidi and I went back to the hotel room. I began looking at my iPhone and Twitter. And Paula Poundstone, the comedian, it so happened she had watched the convention that night. And she sent a tweet. She said, Ted Cruz just said, when his daughter was born, the national debt was $10 trillion. Now it's $16 trillion. What the heck did she do? Well, Heidi and I laughed pretty hard. But you know what? Our daughter Caroline's 5. In her short life, our national debt has grown over 60%. What we are doing to our kids and grandkids is fundamentally immoral. Our parents didn't do it to us. Their parents didn't do it to them. And if we don't turn around, we are consigning the next generation to spending their entire working life not meeting the challenges of the future, but paying off the debt that our generation racked up because we couldn't live within our means. The second way you restore growth is fundamental tax reform. Now, we have seen with the IRS scandal the out-of-control power in Washington. We've seen the IRS asking groups, tell us what books you're reading. Tell us the content of your prayers. Well, you know what? The federal government has no business whatsoever asking any American the content of our prayers. And I think the simplest and best solution is we need to abolish the IRS. Just like drones, just like guns, just like immigration, just like life, if we have to depend on Washington politicians to get that done, it will never, ever be done. The only way we abolish the IRS is if the American people rise up and demand it of our elected officials. And the third critical piece to restoring growth is regulatory reform. And there is no more important regulatory reform that we can do than to repeal every single word of Obamacare. And that reaction right there shows how we win this fight. If I were sitting in the Senate cloakroom, the reaction to that statement would be fundamentally different. I don't know that I'm quick enough to dodge all the things that would be thrown at me. If we have to depend on Washington, it will never be done. We have an opportunity right now, between now and September 30th, to defund Obamacare. Now, a lot of politicians in Washington, in both parties, are telling the American people it can't be done. Why? Because Barack Obama will always stand for his principles. So apparently conservatives have to give up on ours. And you know what? Our friends in the media happily repeat that mantra. They say this is a fool's errand. You're tilting at windmills. Let me tell you, if we can hold 41 Republicans in the U.S. Senate, or 218 Republicans in the U.S. House, we can defund Obamacare. There's a national website, don'tfundit.com. Don'tfundit.com. I would urge every one of you, go to that website, sign the national petition, call your elected representatives, and ask them to stand up and refuse to fund Obamacare. Listen, I can't win this fight. Mike Lee can't win this fight. Rand Paul can't win this fight. No politician in Washington can win this fight to defund Obamacare, because there is a bipartisan mess up there that depends on the ever-growing leviathan of government. The only ones who can win this fight are you. If we see in the next 2 months hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans going to don'tfundit.com, signing the petition, calling their elected representatives, calling their senators, and saying, stand for principle. Look, the wheels are coming off this. The Teamsters are abandoning it. President Obama just granted all of Congress an exception. And he did it because Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats who passed this thing came begging and said, please, 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 let us out of Obamacare. This thing ain't working, but yet I can't count the number of Republicans in Washington who say, well, we can't defund it. No. We can pass symbolic votes against it. But we can't actually stand up and take a risk and potentially be blamed. This is the most important fight this Congress will face, and the only way we win this fight is if the American people rise up and hold our elected officials accountable. The final thing we need is champion opportunity. For a long time, I've advocated what I call opportunity conservatism. That every policy we think about, we talk about, should focus like a laser on opportunity, on easing the means of ascent up the economic ladder, on how it impacts the least well-off among us. You know, the untold truth about the Obama economy is the people who have been hurt the most are the most vulnerable among us. Young people, Hispanics, African Americans, single moms. Because when you pound small businesses with $1.7 trillion in new taxes, with mountains of regulation, it's not the CEOs who lose their job. If you were flying in a private jet 5 years ago, you're still flying in a private jet. It's the people just starting to climb the economic ladder, seeking the American dream. And I think as conservatives, we are and should be the party that champions the little guy, the person working to achieve the American dream. You know, if you think about the best slogan of the last presidential campaign, President Romney's campaign, I think the best slogan was, "You built that." It was a response to President Obama's very, very revealing statement, "You didn't build that. You didn't build that small business." And yet, as good as it was, it could have been much, much better. Because to whom was it directed? It was directed to those who had already built their business, who had already succeeded. How much better would it have been if what we had said was, "You can build that"? Because what President Obama was saying is, you can't build that. You know, you all heard from my dad earlier today. 55 years ago, when my dad showed up in Texas, he'd been imprisoned, he'd been tortured, he was 18, and he couldn't speak English. With $100 in his underwear, he washed dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And yet, he had a passion for freedom. He had a passion for the American dream, and working, washing dishes, he paid his way through the University of Texas, he got a job, he built a business, he worked towards the American dream. Now, my dad has been my hero my whole life. But you know what I find most incredible about his story? How commonplace it is. Every one of us here tonight has a story just like that in our background. Whether it's us or our parents or our great-great-grandparents, we are the children of those who risked everything for freedom and opportunity. I think that's the most fundamental DNA of what it means to be an American, and it's why we're going to take our country back. But it's not going to be politicians in Washington who do it. It's going to be the grassroots. It's going to be the American people. And so I need your help. The only way we can do this is to mobilize a grassroots army of millions of Americans who say, get back to the Constitution, get back to our founding principles, get back to the free market system that enables so many millions to start with nothing and achieve anything. And I need your help to tell the story of how freedom works. How many of y'all have cell phones? I ask each of you to take out your cell phone right now. And if you're willing to help tell the story of how freedom works, how it produces opportunity, I ask you to text the word growth to the number 33733. Text the word growth to 33733. Listen, it's one thing if you have a bunch of politicians talking about this. If we have millions of Americans who are reaching out to their friends, their family, their neighbors, and saying, there was a time when every generation was optimistic about the future, about what their kids and grandkids would have. That's the time we've got to get back to. Let me say two things in conclusion. Number one, I am profoundly optimistic. As dire as things are, we've seen things dire before. In the 1970s, we were told Malays, we had to accept second-class citizens. And yet, the Reagan Revolution, led by many of the men and women in this room, turned this country around. We're seeing right now a new generation of leaders who are rising forward, who are defending free market principles and spreading the word, and with a grassroots army, that's how we turn the country around. And what I would say to you finally is President Reagan famously observed that freedom is not passed down in the bloodstream. That each generation has to stand up and defend our liberty. And that none of us want to live in a world where one day our grandkids ask us, Grandpa, Grandma, what was it like to live in America when people were free? That's why y'all are here. That's what we're fighting for, is because we want a brighter tomorrow, and I am convinced as we continue rising together that we are going to pull back from the brink, pull back from the cliff, and we are together going to restore that shining city on a hill that is the United States of America. Thank you, and God bless you.